I'll be A-OK. I know I'll be A-OK. When I see trouble come my way, I'll be making lemonade. I know I'll be A-OK. I know I'll be A-OK. Hey little lady, I know you're feeling crazy. All your other friends are busy making them babies. Been out in the real world, don't like how it's tasting. Let me change your mind with my little old saying. 2, 4, 6, 8, who do we appreciate?
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session. I've done all the assessments. I have all the data. Now what?
Put some sugar.
We are going to first go over how we're going to spend our time. The purpose of this session is to use knowledge of foundational literacy and assessment data to be able to provide individualized supports for students. We're going to look at our process, which is how we're going to spend our time together. We're going to do an overview of literacy and reading comprehension development from K+. We're going to look at using this strategy that I call the 4-quadrant strategy. And then we're going to look at that strategy in practice. The hope is that by the end of this session, you can actually walk away with a product. So one is understanding what the strategy is, this 4-quadrant strategy, and have an actual draft of how to use the strategy to support student learning and development. As I'm going to share in a second, I was an educator for 8 years, and I remember going through professional developments, and the concepts were great, but I still just could not understand how this was supposed to work in my classroom. And so the hope is that you are able to walk away from this having a very clear, not just strategy, but an actual draft of how to move forward with this in your classroom. A little bit about me. My name is Ryanna Henderson. I was a middle grades teacher, ELA teacher for 8 years. I was lateral entry, so I did not go through a traditional education program. I started my lateral entry program at a school in GCS, and I actually stayed there my entire time as an educator. For the district, I was a curriculum writer, and I also operated as the literacy lab classroom educator, which is essentially just a model classroom where educators could across the district could come see what strategies look like in a real classroom. And I mean real classroom. I had 2 classes of 38 students. So it was very, very real, very realistic for what teachers are going to actually have to encounter. And I'm extremely passionate about incorporating the science of reading into secondary grade levels. My current role is a manager of data and analytics for an education nonprofit, and I use data to help achieve impactful outcomes within the education field. And I spend a lot of my time optimizing processes and procedures, which is the base around what this presentation and what this professional development is actually geared around, which is taking something that can be very complicated, breaking it down, and having a simple process that you don't even have to think about as you are trying to put it together. It doesn't require a lot of heavy thinking. So before we actually hop into our work, we're going to spend about a minute just reflecting in preparation for the work we're going to do. I want you to just think about a couple things. What grade level are you teaching? What are the reading comprehension demands necessary for your students to access your content and curriculum? Are you a high school teacher and students have to be able to access really advanced level texts? Are you in elementary school and students are still learning how to read? You're teaching 2nd grade, students are still decoding, they are still learning phonics. And are there students in your classroom that you have noticed have noticeable gaps in reading comprehension? Take a minute to reflect here. Hopefully that was enough time for you to adequately reflect and answer some of these questions. Now we're going to dive into what I call the literacy development continuum. I want to start off by saying that this is a very abbreviated version that I think still gives you what you need, but isn't overwhelming you with too much information. Because if we're really talking about literacy development from kindergarten through high school, that could be an hour or 2 hour long session in and of itself. But we're going to break it into these 3 buckets, and you can think of it as a continuum starting here and through kindergarten all the way up through high school. So in kindergarten through around 2nd grade, students are learning active reading strategies. So this is where you're seeing students who may not actually be able to read, following along with the teacher, following along with their finger underneath the text, learning active reading strategies. This is where you're also going to see students learning phonics, how words are put together. They're learning bends, blends, digraphs. They are decoding words, and they're memorizing irregularly spelled words. And we would say this is the stage in the continuum where students are learning to read. They are learning the strategies of what a good reader does. They are learning how words are put together, how sentences, how paragraphs are put together. Then as you move into 3rd through around 6th grade, students are spending a lot of more time building a very robust vocabulary. So they are, what I would tell my students, are adding words to their word bank, their like mental word bank, so that they can develop even larger vocabulary and be able to use context clues to figure out what new words mean. And they're building a genre schema, which means they are reading a bunch of different types of text so that as they're reading, they know what to expect. They know when they have an informational text in front of them that they're probably going to see charts. They're probably going to see bullet points. They know that they're supposed to learn something from that text. If they're reading a fantasy piece of literature, they know there might be magic involved. They know what to expect from these different types of texts, so it's easier for them to access them. And so they are spending a lot of time in this block building a large vocabulary, building up a large genre schema. And we label this as reading to learn. So students are spending a lot of time learning lots of new words, learning how lots of different texts are organized and put together. And this all sets them up so that by the time they get to these higher grade levels, they are able to do a lot more analysis. So they are looking at the author's perspective. Why did the author choose to use these words? Why did the author choose this setting? They're spending time doing a literary analysis. This is where you see a lot more Socratic seminars. You're going to see literature circles, students spending a lot less time trying to actually read the text and a lot more time discussing it. And this is where they are spending time analyzing the text. So these are the 3 buckets that I would use to break up the literacy development continuum in order to help me personally understand. And I think it is an abbreviated way that can also help you as well. Let's take a minute, and I want you to think about these 3 questions. Knowing what grade level you teach, what skills should your students be developing? If you're in 5th grade, if you're teaching 5th grade, your students should really be working to develop a robust vocabulary and reading a lot of different types of text. Are there students that are missing those developmentally appropriate skills? So do you have students where you're teaching 5th grade, but they are still learning how words are put together, or they still are missing some active reading strategy? And are there students who already have those skills? Or do you have a student that is just has a huge vocabulary, huge genre schema, and they actually spend most of their time asking questions because they already have all of the skills that they're supposed to have at that level? Let's take a minute and think through those 3 questions. now that you've had time to think, hopefully you've actually thought of examples of where some students may fall in this continuum. Just to give you an example of where my students stood when I was in the classroom, I was teaching 8th grade. So most of my students should have been in this bucket here, where we're spending most of our time analyzing, figuring out why the author chose to use specific language or words or settings, and analyzing the text. In reality, that's not where all my students fell. I had about, and I'm thinking about one class in particular, I had about 6 students who were actually still in that learning to read phase, where there were some irregularly spelled words that they didn't know. There were some blends that they were still struggling with, and they actually were missing a lot of active reading strategies. And then I had about 14 students who were in this bucket here in the reading to learn. They were still missing a lot of the vocabulary they needed to be able to freely read an 8th grade level text. So they were missing a lot of vocabulary, and they hadn't read or been exposed to enough different types of texts and genres to be able to pick up any type of 8th grade text that I gave them. So if I gave them a poem, I might have to explain how a poem is organized before we even jump into it. And then I had about 5 students who were on or above grade level. That left me with 20 students who are reading below grade level, and not just below grade level, different stages. They're in very different stages of the reading continuum. So my students in the learning to read phase are going to need something different than my students who are reading to learn still, and they're still building a vocabulary. And this is where the strategy comes in. So what we're going to do is use our knowledge of reading comprehension development and assessment data to provide individualized supports for students. So I'm going to use this knowledge knowing that my students are probably going to fall into one of these 3 categories: reading to learn, learning to read, or analyzing the text, and what grade level they may be on. I was lucky enough that in the district that I was teaching, we had a reading level assessment that we could give. So I did know my students' grade levels. If you do not have that available to you, you should still be able to see, based on how the student reads aloud to you, are they able to blend words well? Are they really struggling with the context clues? They're really struggling to build their vocabulary, but they can read fluently, then they're probably still in this learning to read stage. If they are reading to learn, sorry. And then if they are able or struggling to like pronounce words correctly, they're probably in that learning to read. And then if they are asking a lot of questions and they can access the text easily, they are probably ready to analyze the text without a ton of support. And I'm going to combine that with the grade level skill to figure out exactly how to best support them. This is what I call the 4-quadrant strategy. In order to do this, I need 2 things: the student's step in their reading development journey, and I need to know their grade level skill proficiency. So could they do a grade level skill that I taught them? And what is their reading level? And so I break this up into 4 pieces. Those who are on target and proficient, that means they're able to access the text and are able to accomplish the grade level skill that I tested them on. On target, not proficient, which means they're able to access the text and unable to accomplish the grade level skill. Below target, but proficient, which means they're reading below grade level, but they actually were able to accomplish the grade level skill. And then not below target, not proficient, which means they're reading well below grade level, they aren't able to access the text, and they weren't able to accomplish the grade level skill. And so based on where they fall in these 4 categories is going to determine how I'm going to support them. So when I think about the steps I'm going to use to support them, what my teacher actions are going to be, your folks who are in the 2 right-hand quadrants, are a little easier, I'll say, to support. And I mean that to say there's not as much digging that usually has to happen to figure out what to do next. So for my on-target proficient folks, they just need an extended learning opportunity. So I'm going to figure out, like, what is their reading level? What are they doing well? How can I help them gain the skills that are going to move them to the next level? And I'm going to give them an activity to do that. For my folks who are on target and still not proficient on that grade level skill, I'm going to do some corrective instruction. So because they're reading on grade level, it's likely that they can access the text. Now, I am going to check to see if maybe they just didn't have the background knowledge to understand the text. You may have seen an assessment that is on a topic that is extremely boring and a student may never read about it, like waterways or something like that. And so that may be the issue, is there was too much terminology that was way too new to them. And if that's the case, I might give them another text on their grade level to see if they can do it with that text. And if not, then what I'm going to do is reteach the skill in a different way. I'm going to figure out what was the gap in understanding, and I'm going to reteach it in a way that targets that misunderstanding and let them practice throughout the week, and then give them the opportunity to be reassessed on that skill. My students who fall in this below target proficient category, there's a couple things I'm going to have to piece through. So first, they were reading below grade level, but maybe we've done some things that have moved them up to being on grade level. So the first thing I'm going to do is retest their reading proficiency. And if they are reading on grade level, I'm actually going to just give them whatever I gave the on-target proficient students, because that's actually where they're going to move to. If they're still not on grade level, then what I'm going to do is conference with the student to understand, one, how they were able to access the text, because maybe they had some strategies that I can use to help my two in the bottom quadrants. And then I'm going to give them some activities and some practice work so that they can work on moving up in their reading level. So if they're on a 5th grade reading level, they are likely going to, and I'm teaching, for example, 6th grade, they're going to be working to build vocabulary and read different types of books. So that's the work I'm going to give them. And then finally, my students who are below target, so reading below grade level and still not proficient, I'm going to, one, check to see if they can accomplish this skill with a text on their reading level. So if they're on a 3rd grade reading level, I'm going to give them a 3rd grade reading level text and see if they can do the skill. If they can do it, I don't need to reteach the skill. But if they cannot, then I'm going to reteach the skill. And we're also going to work on strategies to improve their ability to access the text. And when I reassess them, I'm actually probably going to see if they can do it on a 3rd grade text, because I know already that they're not on grade level. So why would I give them a grade level text to see if they can do the skill? I want to know if they can do the skill. So I'm going to give them a 3rd grade level text and see, can you do the skill using the strategy I taught you now on a text at your grade level? So now let's look at an example of how I would use this. We're going to do an example with 5 students who have a varying skill and literacy development levels. And we're going to see how this matches, or use this data plus their ability to demonstrate, to determine the central idea of a 6th grade text and how it's conveyed through details. So we're going to look at the standard reading informational text 6.2, and we're only going to look at this piece. So I did an assessment. I had 3 questions that were around central idea and how a central idea was conveyed through details. A student would be considered proficient if they got all 3 of those questions correct. If a student does not get all 3, I am not going to say that they're proficient. So I have 5 students. who are on varying levels of reading level and skill score. So I need both of these two things to be able to place them in the quadrant. So we're going to start with Taylor, who's reading on 6th grade reading level, and she was proficient. So she's on target and she's proficient. So we're going to go ahead and put her in that quadrant. Simone is also reading above 6th grade. So we're going to put her, and she was proficient. So we're going to put her in that quadrant as well. Riley is reading on a 3rd grade reading level. So they're below target, and their skill score was only 1 out of 3. So he's below target and he's not proficient. Darius is reading well above grade level, but only got 2 out of 3 correct. So we're going to put him in this bottom right quadrant because he's on target for his reading level, but he's not proficient in this grade level skill that I need him to be able to do. And then Maria is actually reading below grade level on a 4th grade reading level, but she actually was proficient. She got 3 out of 3 correct. And the reason I would use maybe 3 questions instead of like 1 or 2 is because it does allow you to see a little bit more if they are able to do the skill. So I'd like to have at least 3 questions for a specific skill to be able to feel confident in saying that they are or are not proficient. So now that I have them in these 4 quadrants, I can begin taking some next steps. So this is something that I would do maybe on a Friday evening after I've done an assessment, or I might do it over the weekend. Then I'm going to do some next steps with them. So my on target and proficient group, Taylor and Simone are going to get some extended learning opportunities to take their understanding to the next level. Darius is going to get some corrective instruction. So one thing I'm going to do is conference with him and ask what it was maybe about the text that was a struggle for him to understand. If he did understand the text, then what I'm going to do is reteach the skill, figure out what he was misunderstanding, and then give him time throughout the week to practice and then reassess when he feels like he's ready. With Maria, I might have to spend a little bit more time here. First thing I'm going to do is retest her reading proficiency and see if she's still on a 4th grade reading level. If she's not, and she is actually reading on grade level, then I'm going to say, hey, Maria, you're actually going to go over here with Taylor and Simone, and you're going to work on the activity that they're working on. If she's not on a 6th grade reading level, then what I'm going to do is give her some strategies and give her some practice to help build up the skills she needs to be able to move up in her reading level. I'm also going to ask, hey, can you tell me how you were able to understand the text? Because it may be that Maria just had a ton of background knowledge on whatever the text was, and so that's how she was able to access it. But I also want to know, what were the strategies you used to be able to answer these 3 questions? Because maybe there's something that Maria has, a strategy she has that I can use to help Riley or Darius. And then with Riley, who's reading on a 3rd grade reading level, I'm going to check first to see, hey, can you determine the central idea of a text and how it's conveyed through details on a 3rd grade level text? If Riley can do that, then I'm not going to worry about reteaching him a skill. What I am going to focus on is helping him get the skills he needs to move up in his reading level. If Riley still can't do the skill on a 3rd grade reading level, I am going to reteach it, and I'm going to reteach it using that 3rd grade level text. Now I want you to take an opportunity to reflect and apply this to your own practice. I want you to think of a recent assessment your students completed. I want you to think if it is an assessment that covers multiple skills and standards, are there a couple questions that only concentrate on one skill? Think about how students did on that specific skill, and think about their individual reading levels. Where do they fall on that continuum? where would your students fall in each quadrant? I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to take out a sheet of paper, draw 4 boxes, draw 4 quadrants, and see if you can figure out where you would place your students in each of these quadrants. And we're going to take about 2 minutes to do that. Hopefully you had time to place at least a few students in the 4 quadrants. So now I want to look at what this can look like in practice. How can this actually be implemented within the classroom? I had a 90-minute class schedule when I was teaching. You may not have 90 minutes. And if you don't, that's okay. And I'll tell you where you can kind of shift time around to get this conferencing work happening. I will say using this strategy and having students do work that clearly links to their success eliminated a lot of my classroom management problems during a large work block that most people would see as kind of time where you have to manage a lot of students within a classroom. So in a sample kind of schedule, this is what my schedule looked like. I had about a 5-minute warm-up, a 15-minute, usually 15-minute grade level skill-based mini lesson. So if I was teaching a central idea strategy, then I would spend about 15 minutes to read this text and model, have students help me do a question or do practice, then do 10 minutes of group practice, 10 minutes of independent practice, where we would move into a 40-minute reading or research workshop. And that just was where our curriculum allowed. So during this time is where if you had a shorter block, you could make it instead of 40 minutes, you could do 20. And I'll show you how you could work out a schedule to make that happen. This is where that corrective instruction and student individual group or group practice was going to happen. And then we would end with about a 5-minute cleanup or exit ticket. So during this 40-minute reading research workshop, this is where the bulk of this actual work is going to happen. And I'm not going to meet with all of these students in a day. I'm going to break them up. So what this might look like is on Monday, I'm going to meet with my on-target proficient students because there's a lot less lifting during that time that I have to do with them. There is teacher work that has to happen ahead of time. I have to come up with an extended learning opportunity for these students. So I would conference with them together, provide them with this extended learning opportunity, and then give them the autonomy to complete this opportunity independently or in groups. Then on Tuesday, I would work with my on-target, not proficient students. I would provide corrective instruction. I would identify gaps in that understanding, reteach it. And what this student would do, or this group of students would do, is practice the skill after I've given the corrective instruction. And they can request to be reassessed once they feel ready this week. So I work with them on Tuesday. They got Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to work on this skill and see exactly what kind of help they need and practice. And then by Friday, I will ask them to see if they're ready to be reassessed. Then on Wednesday, I'm going to meet with my below target proficient group. So I'm going to reevaluate their reading proficiency. If it's still not proficient, work on those gaps. I'm going to conference them to figure out what strategies they use and if they could be used to help my other students who were not proficient. And then on Thursday, then I might work with Riley or my below target, not proficient students. I'm going to, again, see if they can accomplish that skill on their reading level. And then if they are able to do that, we're really going to focus on moving them up in their reading level. And if not, I'm going to provide that corrective instruction with that text that is on their current reading level. And then on Friday, because teachers are not robots and we do need a little bit of time, would be my time to maybe conference with a student who's absent, or maybe Darius needs more practice. He's like, Ms. Henderson, I'm just not getting it. And I might say, hey, Maria actually used this strategy. Let's see if this works for you. I might do that. It's also okay to use Friday to catch up. We do a lot of work. Teachers do a lot of work throughout the week, and there isn't a lot of downtime in your class blocks. So it's okay also to use Friday as a day to kind of get everything caught up so that you are ready for the next week. So here is kind of a schedule of how I would break this up for about 25 students. So what can this look like in real practice? So on Monday, again, I might work with that on-target proficient group. So Simone and Taylor, they were on target and proficient. They're my first group, so I'm going to meet with them. I actually didn't have a ton of on-target students in this class. So I have, out of 25 students, only about 5 of them are reading on grade level. So because of that, and because the groups are so small, I could actually squeeze them both into Monday. And I could meet with this group for about 10 minutes, this group for about 10 minutes. That's my 20-minute block for the day. That's why I say if you have a shorter class period, you could still get this conference and work time done. You'll just have to shorten it. So I could meet with these two folks or these two groups for about 10 minutes each, and then send them back to go work on their extended learning opportunities, or this on target, not proficient group. They would work on the practice and then work on reassessing throughout the week. That leaves me Tuesday to be able to work with my students who are below target but proficient. I'm going to make sure those groups are no more than like 3 or 4, because I do have to retest their reading levels. So I got to spend a little bit more time with them. So that will give me about maybe 15 minutes with my first group, or 15 minutes with my second group. So I'd make that about 30 minutes. And if I really needed to, and I could only meet with one group this day, then I can only meet with one group this day. Then on Wednesday, I might work with my below target, not proficient group. And in this case, with this sample of students, most of my students were reading below grade level, and a lot of them were not proficient. So I'm going to spend 2 days working through those groups. What I would do is organize them and meet with them by reading level. So all of these students are reading around on a 3rd grade reading level. And I'm going to do that so that if we are practicing the skill, or if I am seeing if they can do the skill on their grade level, I can just provide this one text for this whole group of students. Then I'm going to meet with my 2nd group who's on a 4th grade reading level, same strategy. And then on Thursday, this group is on a 2nd grade reading level. I'm going to have a 2nd grade level text, and we're going to work through that together. And then Friday would be my day where I'm actually going to just catch up, or say a few students weren't here and I need to squeeze them in. I might do that on Friday as well. So this is kind of a sample of how I would organize my week. And again, this is just that 40-ish minute block of my time that I had during my class schedule. So we're going to reflect a little bit before we close out. I want you to just think about what excites you about this strategy. Do you feel like you're able to walk away with how to implement this in your classroom? Can you put students into 4 quadrants? Do you know how to help the students based on the 4 quadrants that are there? And I will also provide, or you can email me, and I'll provide my email on the last slide if you would like kind of a PDF of this slide show, or a PDF of like the 4 quadrants and kind of the teacher actions that go with them. But do you feel like you're able to walk away with putting students in the 4 quadrants and able to figure out how you can put those meeting blocks where you would meet with them, do those teacher actions, and have them work on those assignments or that practice? Do you feel like you can fit that into your schedule? So where do you feel like you can fit this time into your classroom schedule? What are some barriers that you believe would prevent you from implementing this strategy? So do you know students' reading levels? Is that something that is not available to you? Especially if you teach high school, you probably don't have a reading level assessment. Are you thinking about managing classroom behavior during the conference times? Are you thinking about how, okay, Ryanna, that's great, you have a 90-minute class schedule, like mine's only 60. Are you thinking about how a short class schedule could be a barrier? Now let's think about ways that we could overcome these barriers. Can you use your knowledge of literacy development to have an estimate of your students' developmental level? So if you're in high school and you see that a student is struggling to pronounce words and spell them correctly, they probably are missing some phonics work. So you know that they might still be in that like learning to read phase where you might have to figure out what words are they struggling to pronounce and what are some tools that you can give them and strategies you can give them and practice you can give them to help them tackle that. Or if you see that students they can read the text, but they just don't have a ton of vocabulary, they are not able to easily use context clues to figure out what a word means, they're probably in that middle phase. If they are able to read the text, they're able to use context clues to figure out words means, they're able to read all sorts of text, and they spend a lot of time asking questions, then they're probably in that analyzing stage. For classroom management concerns, is there a way you could establish clear procedures and outcomes for this time? So my students always knew that they were working on specific tasks that led directly to them either growing in their reading level or being proficient in the skill. And so I did find that making that clear connection was helpful, and having clear procedures for how we spent that time was also really impactful. If you have a short class schedule, you could create an abbreviated conference schedule, or you could extend your conference schedule into 2 weeks instead of 1. So if you want to focus on students being able to do, especially if it's a core skill, you could spend 2 weeks on it. It's okay if you have them, especially if you are in like elementary or middle school where you're going to have them for an entire year. There's only so many literacy skills in there that are necessarily tested. So you could extend that conference schedule and work with students who are not proficient specifically for an extended amount of time. You could also make it so that you only have about 20 minutes instead of like 40. If you have any questions about how to apply this schedule, this strategy, or if you would like some resources on how to apply this, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email is below, and I'm very open to sharing any resources that I have. I have collected and stored everything from when I was in the classroom, and I'm happy to share. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today.